Hi, everyone.
Hi. Great. There we go. All right.
That's my friend Mike.
This is my friend Lesley.
And we are very familiar with this stage. If you're not familiar, Mike and I host a little show here on the third Thursday of the month called
Queer Film Theory 101. Hooray!
Hooray!
And what we do every month is we invite members of the queer community to come up and talk about movies based on a theme for the month. And they choose movies that fit that theme. And what we're doing is basically pulling out the queer subtext that exists within those movies that might be something that is overt, but it might be something that is less so.
Yeah.
So we have a really good time just kind of talking nostalgia, but also telling our own personal stories and having a really good time with it.
Yeah, so if you've ever watched Top Gun and thought Iceman's a little too attached to Maverick,
you're right.
You're probably right, and you should come hang with us on the third Thursday. We'll talk all about it.
Yes, and we just got done doing our show last week, as Amy mentioned, and that was all about monsters. And we talked about the monstrous other and all of the examples that people presented. Specifically, we're covering that notion. And so we're going to talk a little bit tonight about... everything that is queer.
Queer about horror
monsters.
movies, which is a lot.
Yes. Lesley, there are non-queer people here in the audience, I imagine.
Realized that.
Yes.
We're used to talking to the choir a bit, as it were. And so, Mike, I'm very glad to have included this slide, because I do suspect there's some heterosexuals with us.
Absolutely.
So we'll go deep. You're
welcome here, by the way.
Things. We want to make it accessible for everyone.
Exactly.
We're here for you.
Yes, and if you went to grad school, you probably used the term queering, using postmodern analysis. Right. So we're going to talk about how that applies to film specifically, looking at some of these major tropes. And then we're going to go through some of the types of horror movies.
Right. So let's start about talking about what exactly we mean when we say queer.
Yeah.
We've got a little bulleted list for you
Absolutely. We're talking about being outside of societal norms and behaviors. So what people expect to be proper behavior. Obviously, in horror movies, we're going to be defying a lot of that. And so it's a perfect example of somebody or something that is outside of those typical behaviors. That is specific to heterosexual expectations.
Yes.
When we talk about heterosexuality, we're often talking about procreation. And so that notion is going to come into play a lot of times when we are talking about the characters in these movies. There is this element of sexuality, because when we do mention sexuality as being queer, we are talking about sex itself.
Completely. And then there's an element of like coming out. When you kind of identify within the default, you didn't have to tell your dad from East Texas that you're a sexual being, but I did. And so there's this kind of inherent element of sexualization that exists just by declaring yourself as other when you're ready to make that step for yourself as an individual. And that is sometimes overemphasized in media.
Yes. We mentioned the monstrous other in talking about the movies that we covered last month and we'll be covering here tonight. The monstrous other, when we're thinking of those that are different from us, right? Oftentimes this comes into conversations of xenophobia, this comes into conversations of racism, but this also, like when we're talking about sexuality, if you are outside of the heterosexual norm, oftentimes you are considered to be something scary or different, and therefore monstrous and other.
Yep.
Yes.
A huge part of this is also embracing camp. For those unfamiliar, camp is what we refer to as the thing that's so bad it's good. If you're unaware, we own that. Queers, camp
John Waters
belongs to
invented
us.
it. Yes.
I'm so sorry. You're welcome to like it, but it's ours. And I'm not honestly not entirely sure why horror is so prone to camp. But I think horror as a genre is very quick to kind of fall into the category, whether they meant to or not. And by association, that makes horror ours.
Absolutely, I love it. And finally, we're talking specifically about horror movies because we're talking about the scary time of Halloween.
Gay Christmas.
Gay Christmas
God,
is what
we love
call it.
It's perfect. For anyone who's ever privately toyed with the idea of presenting in a way that goes against that heterosexual norm, Halloween is a playground. It is carte blanche to try things out without having any kind of expectation or judgment placed upon you. So I think for a lot of people, like in 2012, was I out? No. Was I dressed as a little safari man in some pleated khakis and a little boot that gave me power? Yes, I was. And if you've ever not been able to kind of like place this element of the joy of Halloween, I can tell you it's the quiet hum of gender euphoria.
Yep.
And that
Good.
is a lot of what this is
Good.
about too.
And here's where I will now say that I dressed up like a pregnant woman in 7th grade and
Yes.
confused everybody because there was absolutely no purpose for me doing so. And it made dressing down for PE very difficult that day. Thank you.
I definitely dressed up once as a leftover where I covered my entire body in aluminum foil.
Great.
Doesn't breathe.
Fantastic. Okay.
Doesn't breathe.
Next slide. All right. When we are talking about horror movies in particular, there is an element of being very aware of bodies, right? Whether they are being, shown explicitly, whether they are being, injured in some way, there is this very visceral experience that is very present in most horror movies. So this is a huge part of this as well. It emphasizes the sexuality, and it does allow you as an audience member to sort of put yourself into the shoes of either the person who it is happening to or the person who is doing that, okay? Oftentimes, we talk about the victims. You think about those who are present at the camp or at the high school or whatever the trope may be. They're usually young, virile heterosexuals who are the ones who are being targeted for some reason by the individual who is going after them, okay? The killers, their bodies are oftentimes put on display as well. It might be not until the end of the movie, but there will be some kind of a reveal. So either they're monstrous and scary from the beginning, or they might be revealed to be something later on. And again, the camera perspective in horror movies oftentimes allows you to act as if you are the monster who is going after the individuals. You know those camera shots where you can hear the breathing and you can see where they're looking? Or it might be seeing from the perspective of the victims who are running from the scary creature itself. So going back and forth allows for a different understanding, and this is something that is specific to horror movies.
Yeah. So just a little bit of context in terms of the evolution of queer horror. It very closely mirrors the evolution of queer liberation. In the 1930s, we had the Hays Code, which was a self-imposed moral code that the movie industry came together and agreed that they would exclude certain types of content, which included sexual persuasions. It's around this time that a lot of what queer horror looks like is this deep subversion. It's very coded. It's very, it's the kind of thing we take apart in queer film theory because it's meant to really only reveal itself to those who are meant to see it. My favorite example of this is The Bride of Frankenstein. So this came out in 1935, really shortly after the Hays Code, where the director John Whaley,
Frank Whale,
yes, was an out gay man, which is really rare for that time period. And I don't know if you're
James Whale.
Sorry. Thank you. Sorry, notes. But I don't know if you've seen it, but The Bride of Frankenstein is created to be a mate to Frankenstein, and her immediate response to him is absolute revulsion. She rejects him outright and hisses at him in a Lesley icon kind of way as he destroys the two of them in rubble. And it's phenomenal.
And that takes us then into the 1980s, where there is this big renaissance of horror movies. Has anybody here seen Sleepaway Camp? Is this familiar to some? Okay, fantastic. a lot of queer folks raising their hands, which I love. And it is a good example of the counterculture rise of the horror movie, where it became okay to be more explicit, to be a lot more out of the norms of what was expected, right? So there's a new type of horror, a new type of monster that is being shown, and oftentimes it has a lot of queer, there's elements of it that are becoming a lot more explicit.
They're more overt and they're more provocative in a way that's really exciting, I think.
And specifically Sleepaway Camp, I don't want to ruin it. It's been a long time, so hopefully you've seen the movie. The killer actually ends up being a trans character, right? Which is not great representation, but at the same time, it is a shock to the viewer because it is something that has not been seen before. But it does allow you to understand that we are pushing new boundaries and we are going to be putting new characters on the screen for the first time. And they are worthy of being explored.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And that brings us to today. Granted, there are still miles to go, but we're finally mainstream enough to have saccharine, flat, reductive characters just like straight people, as evidenced by Netflix's First Kill. Listen, I loved it. It's fine. We did it. You did it.
Finally, yes.
Okay, fine. So let's talk about some super gay horror tropes.
Yes, so going through some of the types of horror movies so that we can do a little bit of analysis for each one of them. We want to give you 5 of them that we'll quickly go through, give you some examples of those movies and talk about how they would be read from a queer reading.
Yeah. Let's talk about slashers.
Let's talk about slashers.
Yeah.
Thinking of these individuals, you're probably familiar with them. They are outsiders from the beginning, right? They are individuals who either have done something horrible and that has put them outside of society, or in the case of like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they were just raised outside of society and don't know what the rules are, right? They are oftentimes, physically different than others. They are scarred in some way. They look monstrous, so they are representing the monstrous other. And all of them are going after those young, virile, heterosexual people who are living the heteronormative life that they can't, right? And so there's oftentimes a view of them as being angry about it and needing to want revenge on them in some way.
I think a lot of this is potentially a revenge plot for someone who's been othered. It seems for the slasher, society is culpable in it a lot. There's a lot of, they're made in a certain respect, not exclusively, but to a degree. I think a lot about like Us.
Let's talk about Us.
Yeah, and I think this is where we see a lot of crossover with a lot of black horror as well. Is this kind of shared sense of exclusion and this shared sense of
trauma.
Trauma. Yes, 1,000%.
And to specifically call out, if any of you remember Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, has anybody seen that one? That is one of the queerest movies that's ever been made. It is like an examination 100%, where there is a teenager who is struggling with the fact that there is something inside of him trying to get out, and if it gets out, it is going to kill him, right? It is literally, it was written for that purpose, to be a metaphor for this. If you didn't realize that while you were watching it, you're probably straight, so it didn't occur to you. But if you are queer and watching that, oftentimes you're going, 100%.
I did that.
And I will say, Freddy Krueger scares the shit out of me.
Yeah.
It is leftover trauma from just growing up the way that we are. Weird, right?
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's real. All right, let's go talk about devils.
I think there's an element of this that really plays into that kind of 80s counterculture era that we talked about earlier, where there's this sense of like, maybe we're starting to get a sense of like, okay, maybe it's not dangerous, but less dangerous to be out and obvious in our worlds. And so we love the drama, we love the scandal. How do we poke, how do we prod?
We love pissing off our parents.
God, we love it.
Yes.
And when your parents are of a homophobic religious right, Satanic Panic is like the best.
Dressing all in black and being 100% about the devil. We're dressing ourselves that way even if we don't actually,
God, God, it's a rich
worship
text.
the
It's a
Dark Lord.
rich text. And also, maybe some of y'all didn't know that we own camp. Just FYI, we get Toni Collette. As well. She's ours.
She's ours.
Just FYI.
I want to talk about Hellraiser specifically.
Yes.
Those movies are all about the punishment that comes from living excessively, of living deliciously, as one might say, from The Witch. These are examples of individuals who were willing to live outside of the norm. They were kinky. They were like indulgent. They were, inside. They eventually had it come to the outside when they went to hell, right? And they become these monsters that are representative of the way that they lived when they were on Earth.
Yeah.
So it's just like a direct correlation. Clive Barker, who made all of that, totally gay.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, and also I think there's something about, so I was raised in a deeply religious environment, which is not to say that all deeply religious environments are not like great places to be raised. But in my experience, the church was always this source of shame, like having a body. Shame. It's like any impulse, any desire, be it gay or straight, was a thing to be controlled and a thing to be buoyed against. And I feel like this subset of horror films is just this like embrace of that, the opposite side of that coin, which I just find beautiful.
Love it. These beautiful devils.
These
All right.
beautiful devils.
Next.
Talking
about
the mad scientists.
So we mentioned The Bride of Frankenstein,
Yep.
but talking about Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster, the work of Dr. Frankenstein is the perfect example, right, of a man, a straight man who is trying to take women out of the picture.
Yes.
And create
to reproduce
a reproduction of life in order to make a perfect male specimen.
Yes.
Saying that out loud again, that's the gayest statement in the world, right? So, if you watch The Bride of Frankenstein, if you watch the relationship that exists between the two scientists in that story, one of them is trying very hard to get the other one to get back into the lifestyle, whereas he was afraid to do so after his first his attempt and failure. And once he does get back into it in order to write the story and bring a woman into the picture, all of a sudden, it, again, is met with failure because of the fact that they are trying to recreate life without doing it the heteronormative way with reproduction.
Yes.
Fascinating.
It is, and what they end up creating is still this headstrong woman with opinions that they can't control, who sees Frankenstein, who she was literally created for, and is repulsed.
Yep.
It's amazing.
If we look at Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, there's something, again, living inside of him that gets out, and he has to find a way to push it back in. And then let's not talk about the human centipede.
Mike made me look up this photo on my work computer, and I'm hearing from IT tomorrow. Okay, come on, vampires. Do we even need to explain? They're so sexy. Look at Tom and Brad. How in love are they?
Yeah. Tom did not realize that this was going to become a part of gay iconography, this movie.
Classic Tom.
Classic Tom. But here we are, just loving everything about them. I mean, when we talk about vampires, besides the like overt sexuality of the characters, it is the notion of the kink that is involved, right? There is a eroticism to the death that is involved in a way that most other monsters don't do that. But there's also the notion that we are, again, reproducing without the heteronormative way of doing so, right? So a man can create a new male vampire by sucking on him. And transferring life force.
Well, it's true.
It doesn't get any deeper than that.
And even though vampire stories predate it by a lot, it's the perfect analogy for the AIDS crisis as well, where blood becomes this terrifying like vehicle.
And
for
the monsters are the ones who are trying to get it, right? And everyone else is afraid of it.
Plus the idea of living in shadows and living in darkness. like hiding at all times, essentially, is so much of the queer experience in history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, and I just have to plug
yeah.
this absolutely unhinged movie. Yes, that's David Bowie. Yes, that's Catherine Deneuve. Yes, that's Susan Sarandon. It's called The Hunger, and it's absolutely
Lesbian vampires, and it's hot as shit. Yes.
Lesbian vampires. And monsters.
Yes, the sweethearts.
Monsters. The most heartbreaking of the horror film queers.
Yeah, I mean, and it is kind of a catch-all, and this would be where
Sure.
a lot of the monsters that were discussed in the previous talk would be. These are oftentimes individuals that are either misunderstood or are kind of alone in the world and just doing their own thing.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden the nasty protagonists come in and start ruining their life. This sweet. Have you ever watched The Creature from the Black Lagoon? He just comes out of the
wants
water.
to be left alone.
And everybody starts shooting at him. It's horrible.
It's horrible.
The Babadook just wants to live in his house, and this family comes and moves in, and they force him to live in the basement, and it's terrible.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't
he
know
wants to be in the
about
sewer, and kids
Pennywise.
keep bothering him.
But it's Tim Curry, and we own him too, so.
Yes, but there are plenty of examples of these like supernatural monsters that we don't understand them, so our desire is to destroy them.
Right. And as one thing that we have found doing our show as long as we have is there are a lot of themes that come up over and over again. Otherness is hugely one of them, but I think something that I don't know, maybe comes up, maybe this makes more sense for vampires, but there's also the chosen family aspect of them. I'm thinking about Shrek a little bit right now, which I know is not horror, but it's a otherness monster.
If he were in a horror movie.
He would be, and I think the chosen family aspect is part of a lot of these stories as well, is the bond that is formed amongst these others.
Fantastic.
Anyway.
I love it.
So, Mike, it begs the question.
Yes.
Who's the queerest?
Of those different types, who is the queerest? For me, it has to be vampires.
It's just sexiness.
It's the sexiness.
Yeah.
It's the it's the timelessness. I mean, like they're always stylish.
That's
right?
true.
And just the eternal nature of it. And like, man, Interview with a Vampire. That's all.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. I think for me, when I think about at least what we've broken down so far, I feel like, slashers are so much a product of their world. Devils are so otherworldly. Vampires are like made but not born. For me, it's monsters.
The last.
Yeah.
The catch-all.
It really is, because they just are, which is what most of us are.
Yeah.
It's just us being
I love
and
it.
wanting to live our lives in peace if these straight people would leave us alone. I'm kidding. I love straight people.
Good. But be nice to monsters when you see them. That's the story.
Be nice to monsters when you see them.
I
That
love
is the.
All right.
Anyway,
if you want to learn more
resources.
about them, this is some resources. There are some fantastic documentaries that are out there on Shudder TV, if you've heard of that. There were some wonderful docuseries. But this new book, It Came from the Closet, is just a collection of wonderful essays on a bunch of different movies. So highly recommended if you are interested in this topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all for us.
Yeah. Questions? We can share this one for answers.
All right, we've got this down to a science.
on,
Brilliant.
Michael.
So, who would like to kick us off with questions?
We have one over here.
All right, let's do that.
Oh, two?
I will admit I've been to a couple of queer film theory. Out of all the topics you've done, what is your favorite?
Oh, for queer film theory?
Is it monsters or is it something else?
Oh, as far as topics are concerned.
Yeah.
I will say yes, 100%. Monsters is my favorite one. It's one of the themes that we do every single year when we get to October, because the field is so rich.
Yeah.
You can go any of those different routes. There's even more of them if we went ghosts or something else. So yes, we could continue to break them down. There's so much to research. So that's mine.
I'm going to have to just plug our Susan Sarandon month.
That's fair.
Because that's where I learned about The Hunger, and I'm grateful.
Excellent.
All right, so I see a hand here. I see a hand here. I think I'm going to go here, then there.
Beautiful.
All right.
Where do aliens fit in all of this?
Oh my, can we talk about Gonzo for a minute? Because one thing, if you've been to a queer film that you probably have heard me like wax poetic about is how the Muppets are inherently queer. And I think a lot of it, I think aliens can go a lot of directions. What it kind of evokes for me is that the absolute epitome of otherness in the Muppet cinematic universe is Gonzo. It's like he's loved, but he's also just sort of tolerated, and he never like fits in with anyone. He's a weirdo. And Muppets from Space is when Gonzo finds out that he actually is an alien, and this like entire ship of people that are Gonzos come down and like welcome him and love him in a way that his Muppet compatriots, as lovely as they are as allies, can never quite fully understand and appreciate him. And it's one of the most beautiful pieces of cinema that I can think of. And
I would add that it's probably fitting into the monsters.
it's true.
Because of the fact that it is that monstrous other that is completely misunderstood and is oftentimes forced to fit into a certain picture or is usually destroyed.
I think that also if the nature in which they're vilified immediately, it's like any sort of alien invasion movie, the assumption is invasion immediately. There's no like big alien franchise where they try peace. You know what I mean? And oh yeah, I get it. Okay.
Movies, though.
Yeah, not horror. Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it too. Is this like the assumption of evil?
Yeah.
All right, so we have a question here, and then I see one in this back corner, and yeah, we'll just see where we can get from there. So what you got?
Hey, y'all. So you talked about how characters recently have been getting more overtly queer in cinema, television. What do you think is gained or lost? Do you feel excitement or grief about queerness becoming more or less obfuscated over the course of time? What are your feelings around it?
That's a great question. I think what does excite me about it, I think for me, there's always the element of representation that I know. I mentioned First Kill. It's not a good show. I watched every second of it. I loved every second of it. If I'd seen First Kill at 13, I would have been insufferable. And that makes me excited for 13-year-olds right now. That was a thing I didn't get to have. Yeah, we should have vapid, shallow characters that look like us and talk like us and do the things we want to do. And that is really exciting to me.
On the other side of that, yes, if you are talking about like wanting there to be, like only the rich, complex characters that are getting nominated for Oscars and require actors to go super deep to get there. There is maybe a little bit that we're, maybe we are losing that, but I would always give that up for the sake of there being a comfortable place of representation for everybody to see themselves.
Well, because, and I think a lot of what the trap that this kind of content falls into in that era is tragedy. Like, can we not, what percentage of lesbian films are just like period pieces where they never touch? Like, do we have to keep doing that? Can we just have some ordinary like fucking shit? And I think that's important to see. But I love the CW, so I don't know what the weight of that statement has.
Good.
Okay, question back here.
Real quick, I just started watching Paul House of Usher on Netflix. I was wondering if you guys had seen it. It is extremely queer.
Is it? It's on my list. I have not seen it yet, though. Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, question back here.
Yes.
I wanted to know what you thought about characters that were sort of in between being monsters, but also are there to eradicate monsters like Blade, like Buffy, Hellboy, Vampire Hunter D, that they sort of have their legs in both worlds. And I wanted to know where that fell in your analysis of this sort of thing.
That's a really good, I have a thought.
Yeah.
I feel like thinking about Buffy especially, I feel like it is this like ultimate like like ally story, because like, yes, Buffy's there to eradicate vampires. Spoiler alert, she falls in love with one. And there's this humanization of the two of them, that's right. There's this humanization of the other. Honestly, a lot of First Kill, if you're not familiar, it's a vampire falling for a vampire hunter in an American high school. And I think there's a lot of humanity in those kinds of stories, where I think when we're not including those kinds of characters, can end up a bit too black and white. And I think there's a lot of like empathy that comes from the stories that's really important too.
Yep. And to jump on that, I would say that having to put yourself into the shoes of the other and gaining empathy for that other, and like knowing that they are who you are supposed to be against. Again, that really emphasizes the need for allyship and how that can be viewed. But also, I mean, if we're talking about Blade, he's living in both worlds. He's a little bi, right? Right? Like it's totally fair to explore that, right? And to also allow for there to be evil and there to be good versions. To allow for the complexity that there are evil gays out there, right? Just like there are good gays. But the reality is that, you know, there's just more options that are out there in the world, and we're going to just keep seeing the different variations and nuances of them. Yeah.
Marvelous. All right, we have a question from Twitch, and then we're going to wrap that up.
Oh, it's not from Twitch, it's from me. So, sleepaway camp.
Yeah.
Which analysis camp do you fall in? Is it about the evil transgender person, or is it about the evils of forcing someone to live as a gender that they are not?
You haven't seen it.
I haven't.
Okay, so I can say directly it is the latter for sure. It's what we were talking about of like the world that you are raised in. If we think of like Psycho, Norman was raised with a mother that sort of like put thoughts in his brain, and that he latched onto, and that's what caused him to end up acting out the way that he did. So there are slashers that fit that, and I would say that would be an example of that. So it's not that that character being trans makes them, a villain immediately. It's that they were put through a lot beforehand that you're never going to hear the backstory of, but would be just as important to hear and would be necessary to understand that character. Yeah.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. Mike, Lesley, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Yes, indeed.
Can we plug really quick? And just
Absolutely.
say, if you like what you saw us kind of doing and you'd like to see more examples of it, the third Thursday of every month is where we do this. And Amy is actually going to be in our next show. So on the third Thursday, which I believe is the 19th, I want to say, but I might be wrong, we're going to be covering fantastic movies, including Tank Girl. So come and join us in the room at that time. Okay, bye.
Love it.